Hey guys, welcome back to my Flickers of Fear movie review show. So, I have to admit, there was kind of a little bit of a convoluted way that I kind of came across this movie that I'm talking about today, which is a thriller from 2022 called Resurrection. So, if you guys will remember, just a week or two back, I actually watched and reviewed the movie Pearl from 2023, which is excellent, by the way. So, if you want to watch that review, you can. And after I watched it, I was kind of watching some of my favorite YouTube horror channels, like discussing it, so I get some different perspectives on it and stuff like that. And one of the channels that I watch, I think it's Sinister Cinema Reviews, and they happen to bring up that excellent monologue from Pearl, which I discussed in my review. And while they mentioned it, they also happened to mention another similar monologue from Rebecca Hall from the movie Resurrection. So I thought to myself, well, I kind of had seen that one like just in passing, but I'd never really, it never really caught my eye particularly. But I got really interested in it, and then I found out that it was streaming on Shudder. It's also on Hulu if you don't have Shudder. So, I decided I was going to watch it because I love Rebecca Hall and it sounded pretty cool. Like, I really like a good thriller. So I was like, hey, why not? So Resurrection is actually the second movie directed by a guy named Andrew Simons. I'm not really sure if that's how you pronounce his last name. Hopefully that's right. If it's not, I apologize. He also wrote the screenplay, and the screenplay was actually on the Hollywood Blacklist, which is what they call like the most popular unproduced scripts for a given year. This one was on there in 2019, but obviously they finally made it. Now, this movie premiered at Sundance back in January of 2022 and had like a pretty favorable reception all around. Tim Roth is also in this. I love him, and he's like the main antagonist. He doesn't have nearly as much screen time as Rebecca Hall does. I mean, she's pretty much carries the whole movie, but he's also really, really outstanding, and he's just super super creepy and like absolutely skin crawling like despite the role being fairly limited. Now, I will note that Resurrection is a thriller, very loosely of the stalked by an ex kind of variety, but it has a lot more stuff than that going on. Now, I did see some critics arguing that the sort of bonkers shit that happens toward the end is actually maybe kind of sort of low key supernatural. I'm not sure I agree with that assessment, but the ending is a little bit of a head scratcher for sure, in the sense that it's likely metaphorical, could possibly be literal, but like I said, if it was literal, there would be like some kind of supernatural or paranormal shit going on, which, that's fair, whatever. So I'm just gonna say, if you're in the mood for like a more straightforward kind of thriller with a realistic resolution that's everything's gonna be tied up with a bow, then you might want to look elsewhere, because this one gets a little weird toward the end. Now, as with most movies I review, sometimes I remember to bring this up and sometimes I don't, because, that's just how I kind of roll. I'm going to suggest that you go into this one completely blind, like if you're interested in watching it as I did, because it does kind of go in some strange directions that are a lot more interesting if you don't know anything beforehand. But that said, in order to discuss the movie with any depth or substance at all, I'm going to have to talk about some plot points that you might not want to know ahead of time. So keep in mind that there may be spoilers ahead, though I'm not going to spoil the entire story or the ending. So as I mentioned, Rebecca Hall is the main character in this, and she just gives like a completely like tour de force performance. She plays a woman named Margaret, and she's kind of this high-powered executive in like a biotech company of some kind. And at least on the surface, she seems to have her life very tightly under control. You know what I mean? She's got it all together, or so it seems. She's not in a like long-term relationship. She's not married or anything like that, but she does have a soon-to-be 18-year-old daughter named Abby, who's played by Grace Kaufman. The daughter is actually pretty cute. She's kind of this wise-ass gamer girl. She's going to be heading off to college in a few short months, which is kind of a source of building anxiety for Margaret as well, because she's leaving the nest and she doesn't really want her to go. Margaret, I'm going to say, also has a touch of OCD, which they don't really hammer too much on, but it's just like little things that they sprinkle in there to kind of give that suggestion. And she's also like an obsessive runner, you know what I mean? So she's always kind of pounding just very robotically, like down the streets in New York. I did believe this was maybe shot in Brooklyn, but I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, so she's just running down there with her arms pumping by her sides, like she's just very serious about it and everything like that. Oh, and also she is banging her married coworker. His name is Peter. Although it's clear she's just in it for the sex. It's just kind of like she calls up, "Hey, my daughter's not home. Come over, let's fuck." And then she's like, "All right, get out." I mean, they do kind of talk and stuff like that, but you can tell that that's her main thing. She's not really into like relationships. So at the beginning of the movie, we see Margaret, who she's like apparently counseling an intern named Gwen at her company. And she's telling Gwen how she needs to, like yesterday, dump her controlling, gaslighting boyfriend, who sounds like a shithead, not gonna lie. Is this foreshadowing? Perhaps. Yes, it is foreshadowing. Because Margaret is obviously giving Gwen advice that she probably should have heeded herself many years ago, which will become apparent as the story unfolds. So at this point, Margaret's kind of day to day is very locked down into this routine that seemingly works for her. She doesn't seem happy, really, but she kind of appears satisfied that she's been able to achieve such a firm grip on her own existence. She's keeping everything under control, you know what I mean? Which, like I said, it's it's kind of like it'll play out why she's like that later on. Now, the first hint that something really bad might be lurking on the horizon is that her daughter Abby comes home from her friend's house one afternoon and is like, "Hey, look at this." She kind of pulls a prank, but then she's like, "Look at this crazy shit that I found in my purse," like her little change purse. It's a human tooth, which, okay. I mean, that kind of like creeped me the fuck out because it kind of gave me flashbacks. You guys know how much I love the 1976 movie The Tenant, which was directed by Roman Polanski. And there's a scene in that where he finds a tooth like in a hole in the wall, and that always kind of creeped me out. I don't know why. It's just like so random. It's just like a part of someone's body, and it's just like, okay. But yeah, so she finds a tooth like in her purse. I'm guessing that the tooth was maybe an homage to The Tenant, but maybe not. Maybe it's a complete coincidence. I would have thought that it was, but maybe not. What do I know? So Abby says, she has absolutely no idea how this tooth got in her purse, but she kind of just thinks the whole thing is amusing and like no big deal, whatever. She's like, "Hey, that's weird, okay." Margaret is obviously a little more troubled by how bizarre that situation is, but because there's really no context for the tooth, and it mysteriously appearing there, she just kind of throws it away and doesn't really think any more about it. Not long after this, though, something a little more concrete happens that kind of sends her off on this spiral of heightening paranoia, which will ramp up excessively like as the movie goes on. So Margaret is at this conference and she's getting kind of bored because like the woman that's lecturing is, it's like whatever. And so she starts like looking around the room at the other attendees, and she sees in the front row, like she just catches a glimpse of the side of the dude's face, but she sees this man, and his presence, when she realizes who it is, sends her into like an immediate panic attack. Like she's just staring super hard at him, like hyperventilating. She's clearly like unable to believe her eyes. Oh my God, I can't believe that's fucking him. And then she straight up just bolts out of the conference room and she runs all the way home, like in her little business suit and everything. She just runs the fuck home. So when she gets there, her daughter Abby like sees her mom like all fucking sweaty and obviously very, very anxious. And Abby's like, "What the hell is your deal?" Like, as you would. But Margaret just kind of makes an excuse and sort of like tries to minimize it. You know what I mean? Now I'm going to say like from this point forward, Margaret was pretty overprotective of her daughter anyway, like to start with. But from this point forward, she gets a lot more overprotective. Like her daughter even calls her like suffocating. "Oh, you're even more suffocating than you were before," which is fair. You know what I mean? But from this point, she's like essentially like forcing her to stay home, like in the apartment, even though before she would kind of like let her go out and stay with friends overnight. I mean, she's almost 18, so she's almost an adult, but now she's just like, yeah, you're not going anywhere. You know what I mean? But she won't really tell Abby why. So then after this, like events really kind of start to ramp up. Like Margaret has this dream where she opens the oven in the apartment and there's like a dead baby in there, which is like a pretty creepy scene. And then later, she thinks that she sees the man from the conference in the same department store that she's shopping in with Abby. And when this happens, she just like grabs Abby and like hustles her out of the mall, like without explaining anything. But it's very clear from how Abby reacts to this that as this is going on, she's a lot more afraid of her mom's, suddenly very erratic behavior than she is of any mysterious outside threat that she doesn't know anything about. Not much later, Abby is actually in a kind of a minor accident where they don't say exactly what happens, but it seems like she crashes her bike, like while she's drunk. I don't know if she just falls over on her bike or if a car hits her while she's on her bike or something like that. But she isn't hurt bad. But this incident kind of takes on, it's not like a huge deal, but it does take on like a slightly more sinister overtone, like as the story goes on. And then, subsequently, Margaret sees this mysterious man sitting on a bench in the park, like in broad daylight, like near her work where she happens to be walking through. And then at this point, she decides that she's going to confront him. So she just like walks up to him and asks him like point blank, what are you doing here? Like, why are you following me? Now, the man, who we soon learn is named David, who's obviously played by Tim Roth, initially pretends like he doesn't know her. But then they have this whole exchange, which is like really disquieting. And as that goes on, it starts to become pretty obvious that he knows exactly who she is. And before he leaves her in the park, he kind of does this really, really creepy smile at her, and one of his teeth is missing. So at this point, obviously, Margaret is convinced that David is stalking her, and that both she and her daughter are in danger. So she goes to the police to report him, but he hasn't really done anything directly threatening. I mean, because the cops are just like, well, he just happened to be in 3 like public places where you were, and he didn't really do anything to you. He didn't threaten you or anything like that. So there's really nothing they can do. You know what I mean? But it's right here where she's reporting this to the police that we find out that Margaret and David were involved in a relationship 22 years ago. But she hasn't seen him in more than 2 decades, and she can't imagine why he would just suddenly reappear in her life unless he had some kind of nefarious purpose, Now, it's very, very obvious to the viewer, just from Margaret's very extreme reaction to seeing David, even the first time and then every subsequent time she sees him. Just from that reaction, you're led to believe that something really unimaginably horrible must have gone down between the two of them to make her just lose her completely carefully cultivated, cool ass, controlled life so quickly. Like everything just falls to pieces, like immediately, like as soon as she sees him. But for a while, it's not really sure what the nature of their relationship dynamic was. This actually gets revealed in that monologue that I was talking about earlier, which, like I said, I can see the similarities to Pearl because it's just like one take, like one shot, and it's just like focused on her face, and she's just talking and going through all these emotions. So it's a completely different context, obviously, but I can see why those two things would be compared. So Margaret, in this monologue, lays this whole totally bizarre story out on her intern, Gwen, who, just happened to be there and was like, hey, you seem like you're not okay. Like, do you need to talk about it? And she's like, oh, do I need to talk about it? And then Gwen's like, they're like, oh, sorry, I asked kind of thing. Yeah, because Gwen is clearly not ready for this level of fucked upness that is described. So I don't really, like I said, this is a fairly new movie, so I don't really want to describe all the details of like the shit that went down between Margaret and David back when, 22 years ago when Margaret was an 18-year-old. But suffice it to say that it was kind of like this really sick power game where David would essentially, like, because he was much older than her, and he would manipulate her into doing stuff that he called kindnesses. They were essentially like extended tortures or like endurance tests kind of thing. And she would have to do them in order to earn his love and admiration. You know what I mean? There's also that kind of stuff. There was also a baby involved in the situation, as hinted at by the baby in the oven dream that she had earlier on in the movie. But I won't spoil what happened there either because it's really something else. And it kind of like ties into a lot of the shit that goes on later on in the movie. But when she says in the monologue, like, what went on with the baby, I, for real, like, out loud was like, what the fuck? So, in sum, Margaret was extensively psychologically damaged by this man. And that has, that explains, in hindsight, like, why she's taken such great pains to construct this really rigid, like, shell around herself, since then. And why just the mere reemergence of this man, like, 20 odd years later, just crumbles all of these defenses that she had pretty much immediately. Like, it puts her right back into his twisted clutches again, as though all of the intervening years hadn't even happened. So as the story goes on, Margaret starts to get more and more unhinged, perhaps understandably so, and there is a little bit of ambiguity over whether, I don't know if this is the case, whether she's actually, I don't want to say imagining, but maybe overestimating the danger that David presents. I don't know if that's the case, but like I said, there is some kind of weird shit going on in this, so you're not entirely sure how much of it is her mental processes, like, making things up. But he is, like, super dangerous. I don't think there's any ambiguity about that. So Abby, her daughter, and Peter, the guy she's banging, who actually turns out is in love with her, even though he's married to someone else. So they kind of band together and try to help her, because they don't really know anything about David, or if they do, they don't think it's as bad as she says. So they think that Margaret is essentially just, like, losing her marbles, because she really does seem to be completely, like, going off the deep end. But Margaret just pushes them away. She does not want their help, because she is just adamant that she's doing whatever it is that she has to do to protect her daughter from David. She is going to take out this threat. But from everyone else's point of view, she seems like she's going completely and utterly insane. So yeah, really, both Rebecca Hall and Tim Roth give amazing performances in this. I'd also like to shout out Grace Kaufman. She plays Abby. She's a really good character. She's very sympathetic, and she's completely natural and real. Like, she comes across exactly like that character. Like, there doesn't seem to be any acting involved. I mentioned in my Pearl review that, how I thought it was, like, a real shame that actors don't usually get much recognition for horror films. I kind of feel like this is a thriller for sure, but I kind of feel like the end of it pushes it more into horror territory. So I would, guess that this is kind of a horror film. And I kind of feel like Resurrection is a lot more evidence of this charge of, like, actors not getting the recognition. I kind of feel like, had Rebecca Hall given this performance in a straight drama, she probably would have been nominated for something. But, what are you going to do? Now, as I alluded to earlier, the third act of this does go to some kind of wild places, and it's sort of left to the viewer to decide how much of what we see is literally real and how much is Margaret's possibly skewed perception. So there's that. Now, the first 2/3 of the movie, I guess I would call it something of a slow burn. I didn't mind that. I didn't find it slow, but some people might. But I thought, like, the mystery was so engaging. Like, who is this guy? What the fuck went on with this? Like, because you could tell, like, something really, really bad went on, and they kind of played it out a long time and kind of kept you on the hook. But I liked that. But the last part does go kind of out there, and does also have probably more gore than you would expect. It's not a bloodbath, but there is, like, some kind of gory scenes, like a big gory scene toward the end. So, if that's going to bother you, just know that that's in there. I kind of feel, maybe some people might feel like the specifics of Margaret and David's relationship were maybe too strange to be believable. I didn't find that, like I said, because I know some weird-ass people and, like, some weird-ass shit going on. So it's not really that weird, but it's kind of weird. Or maybe people might grumble about the possibly metaphorical or unreliable narrator aspect of, like, the last part of the story. I didn't mind either of those things, and I actually really dug this movie overall. Like I said, the acting is amazing, the cinematography is nice, the mystery was, like, really engaging, and it kind of just went for broke at the end. I mean, I really liked that it kind of just had the stones to take something like a standard thriller and then just get weird with it. You know what I mean? It's not surreal, it's not like super out there, but it does go in a way that a lot of thrillers don't go, and like leave stuff ambiguous or leave it open to interpretation a little bit. So, you know, your mileage may vary on that, but I really liked it a lot. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.